I was just this young, very excited engineer who was willing to step out on a limb and go after something that I had no certainty of whether or not it would work.
This is Journey to Point B, where you can find success stories of people who have achieved the same goals you're striving for. I'm your host, Lucia Chomo, and it's my hope that these stories will provide motivation for your own journey to Point B. Let's begin. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining in for another episode. Today, I have a special guest, Stephen English. Stephen has more than 20 years experience in engineering. He served as a trainer and managed company-wide change management activities at Fortune 500 organizations. He is an ICF professional, certified coach, a TEDx speaker, and an everything disc facilitator. On top of that, he founded multiple Toastmasters public speaking clubs where I actually met him. Through his coaching practice, Stephen guides engineering executives and their teams to develop their personal and professional leadership skills. Stephen has managed to do a massive organizational change at a large tech company, and today he will walk us through how he accomplished this process. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lucia. It's great to be here. Great
It's
to see you
such a
again.
pleasure to have you. So, Stephen, I'm curious if you can walk us through the process. Like, when did you spot that there is even a need for that organizational change?
Yeah, it's a great question because you're starting with how did I spot the need, which is the first two steps in any change management activity. And it was funny because when you were asking me, like, what do you want to talk about? I thought a lot about, well, my own personal changes and my own change in my career. I think about clients and breakthroughs they've had and results they've had. And then I went back to really in the beginning of my career, something that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me looking back, even even then, looking back on the result after a year, I thought, wow, this was really extraordinary, especially for how junior I was. So just to kind of put some timing context to it, I graduated in 1998 and this was in 2003. So I was 5 years out of college. I had gone and worked at two different companies prior to this company, this STMicroelectronics. And at the first company, I picked up a Six Sigma black belt certification, and I was the youngest black belt that they ever certified. I
Mhm.
am so grateful to Diane Franco Macaro, my first boss, the first boss out of college. Diane saw something in me and she sent me off for Six Sigma training. So there I was at my third company. Second company was a bit of a speed bump. I was only there for 3 months. I'm not even going to talk much about them, but I was at the second company. We're sitting there in a customer audit, which were not unusual. So being a quality and reliability engineer was often pulled into these customer audits. Now, what was unusual about this customer audit was that it had come on the heels of what's commonly referred to in the manufacturing world as a spill. And what a spill is when you ship the product and the product gets in the customer's hands and then it has a problem there. And it caused a line down. It caused a line down for General Motors, caused a line down for the Cadillac line. So we're talking about their premier luxury vehicle. So there was a lot of emphasis put on it. And the reason why that line went line down was because of a Bose radio. Maybe you've heard of Bose. Bose is pretty common, great company. And we at Microelectronics shipped them some really horrible product. And of course, we were taking hits to the chin and to the belly in the forms of minor and major nonconformances. So anybody who's been in the audit world knows about what a nonconformance means. And at the end of the audit day, the vice president of quality from Bose asked, "Do you use Six Sigma?" And I can remember the moment. It was like that. Oh my God, here comes some opportunity. So the first thing I would say in every change management is to have awareness, so
Mm.
I'm basing this all on, so for those who are change management experts out there, this is the ProSci model. So Jeffrey Hyatt in the 1980s came up with the ADKAR model. So ProSci is a company run by Jeff Hyatt, and he came up with the ADKAR model. There's many different change management models out there. ADKAR is
Mhm.
one of them. And the A in ADKAR stands for awareness. So that's the need for change. Now, while I didn't know whether or not the company I was employed by wanted to have this
Mhm.
change, I knew that there was maybe a need based on what it was that the customer was asking for. So that's where the whole thing started. And I said, okay, there, there's some voice of customer here. Let me understand what it is that is I would say the current thinking around this need for Six Sigma at STMicroelectronics. So I went and I talked to a lot of different people. And at that time, we were a TQM house, total quality management. TQM was created in the 1950s,
Mm.
and Six Sigma was created in the 80s by Robert Smith of Motorola. He coined the phrase. And not to go too deep into the differences between TQM and Six Sigma, it doesn't matter. You can just say going from A to B. I had to understand what were the opinions and the thoughts of the people in the organization around Six Sigma. And so that was that awareness piece. And
Mhm.
once I understood that, I could shift into the D of the ADKAR model, which is desire, and understand what are the levers of desire here of influencing this organization. You had things like what the rest of the industry was doing. So I went and I dug up and I found out that 8 out of 10 of the largest semiconductor suppliers, electric suppliers of microelectronics, silicon chips, 8 out of 10 of them had some form of a Six Sigma program in the organization. I also found out that the vice president of sales, he was very much an advocate for this because he was out there in the field talking to the customer. And this wasn't the first time that he got this question. So those were the first two pieces of it. It was one, what was the current awareness of the company around Six Sigma? And then what was the desire? And from that, I began my own influencing campaign to get them to the point where they would want to bring this in. Now, there was a lot of things that went into that in terms of conversations with executives, conversations with Six Sigma providers, and having them come out and talk to us about how to change, which brings us to the next letter in the ADKAR model. So that's knowledge. So the knowledge of how it is that an organization does go from TQM over to Six Sigma, because that at the time it was actually a pretty common thing to have happen across different organizations. So that was really, how it all started, right?
What stands out to me is that you saw something and you said something. Because I assume that you were not the only one that saw that something is not necessarily working as optimal as it could,
Mhm.
but you saw something and you started doing something about it. And you didn't think, hey, is this my role? Is this on my plate? Is this my responsibility? You just said, okay, let me start. And I think it's such a great example how movement can start anywhere. And everybody can start a movement if they have the desire in them, if they are willing to take the first step to understand, is there awareness, is there a desire, do they want to do something about it?
I'll tell you one thing that was really funny, an anecdote. I ran into the CEO. Gosh, I'm really stretching my knowledge base here, but Pasquale, and I forgot his last name. So ST Microelectronics is a French Italian company, so there's a lot of Italian names.
Uh-huh.
And I ran into the CEO and he was like, "Why would we want to switch from TQM? It has so many tools." And I know I just made him sound more like Dracula than an Italian, you know, these aren't the tools you're looking for. And he had a lot of pushback. And so I knew I had an uphill battle because there were a lot of stalwarts, some people that were going to be resistors to change. And I had to go around and find out, who it was that was, I wouldn't say on my side, because really it wasn't personal. Because like you said, it wasn't even, or was implied there is it wasn't even part of my job. Uh,
Mhm.
I really saw it as an opportunity not only to make a name for myself in the company, which is, obvious personal professional goal. I also saw it as an opportunity for the engineers around me to level up because here it
Yeah.
was, the rest of the industry. was using, Minitab and jump and all these statistical methods. And meanwhile, here we were with TQM. And
Mhm.
I knew that it was very dated. It wasn't helping anybody's resume, so to speak. So yeah, there were a lot of moments along the way where I did ask myself, like, why the heck am I doing this? And there was a moment when the so some leadership from France came over, and we had this meeting with the Six Sigma provider, the people who would help us train this. And they were still in a sales mode at that point.
Mhm.
And then that leader from France said, I've got a guy you're going to work with. And so all of a sudden now it went from, just little old me to myself and a gentleman named Michel Laferrand. And so Michel and I, we were the Six Sigma duo, right? I went out and I bought myself a little suit, got myself my black suit and my black pinstripe suit, and started, visiting different sites in the country and then around the world. And that was a really, really scary and exciting time at the same time. And, uh, it really, looking back on it, the reason why I chose this was because it was, here I was, it was like a David and Goliath moment, right? Like I was just this young, very excited engineer who was willing to step out on a limb and go after something that I had no certainty of whether or not it would work. And I had a ton of pushback. I even had other engineers. And you can go on my LinkedIn, or anybody can go on my LinkedIn and go way back and see a gentleman named Vidas Sargunas, a brilliant scientist. And he was one of the most ardent uh, opposers, resistors, if you will, to this. And you can see I changed his mind about it. But yeah, I had no attachment to outcome. I was just doing what I could. And, as far as the rest of the steps, after people understood, they had the knowledge of how will this change happen, then it was really about building up the abilities of the engineering staff to use these tools. And of
Mhm.
course, what ended up happening was that there was, we ended up hiring these Six Sigma providers to teach worldwide green belt waves. So anybody who's familiar with Six Sigma, there's white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, and then master black belt. And so we got green belt waves around the world. And I just remember getting these messages from engineers in Singapore and engineers in Italy and France. And it was really very fulfilling, very fulfilling
Mhm.
to have people reach out to me and have them thank me, because they hadn't gotten a lot of great training up until that point. And so, in that ADCAR model, looking at ability, that was really, really important to making this change have a strong foundation. And
Mhm.
then the last piece in that ADCAR model was reinforcement. And that was making sure that the leadership was looking at these projects, looking at the review of the projects with some periodicity, also helping with any roadblocks, finding champions for every one of these projects. So an executive leader who would help push through any roadblocks. Ultimately, funny story as it would be, I had an opportunity to become a master black belt across the region in the United States over two factories, Carrollton, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona. And there was something, I had a gut feeling about the investment in the company, and I chose to leave. So I
Mm.
sometimes go back and I find people that are still there, and I'm like, "Hey, who's championing Six Sigma now for the company?" And I've found some articles on the internet, and who it is in the company who's still running it. But
Mhm.
it was a from a legacy perspective, I know that I can look back on my life and I can say I did that. And it was very,
Yeah.
very fulfilling
Yeah.
to lead that and champion it as this little engineer that could. Well, I was actually, at that point, I was already a team leader. I was in a management position. However, that was not my job. And I had a director who was incredibly supportive of me and really just, kind of stood back and said, "This is your show, Steve.
It's
You go. As much time as you need, whatever it is that you need to do, just go."
And I think it's such a great example how taking one step at a time. Because if you look now at the impact that that change created, it's massive. Looking at taking that step, it can feel like too much. But
Right.
taking one step first, getting curious, see where they are, and taking one
Mhm.
step at a time, you can really create an amazing result. You already alluded to some of the challenges that you encounter, but I'm just curious if you were to look at what was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome and how you overcame it.
Yeah, in terms of the biggest challenge, you're talking about the year 2003, and so all we really had in terms of communication was email and telephone.
Mm,
Looking back on it now, I think one of the biggest challenges was the speed of information and the ability to spread or cascade or broadcast information at scale. Whereas nowadays, instead of having to get on an airplane and fly to Carrollton, Texas, and do a presentation there, and then fly to Kroll in France and the south of France, or
mhm,
Rousset. Sorry, Rousset's in the south of France, but fly to Rousset or fly to Kroll outside of Grenoble, or fly to Singapore, or that just so slow. It was so very slow, and to if that was one of the challenges, and I think there was a kind of a merit and demerit of it going at that speed, and I think you alluded to it in terms of it being step by step. It
mhm,
did give me the opportunity, even though the communication was a big challenge, it did give me a opportunity to really read the organization and understand what were some of the places where people had concerns so that I could handle those concerns in the next conversation and the next and the next. Because it was almost like I was learning in every single time I went to a site and I made a presentation, and then I had those, the after the meeting, because there were people who were hesitant to raise their hands and challenge this, because it did seem very top down, and for people who were quieter resistors, maybe the introverts in the room, then I had to hear about it in the meeting after the meeting. So I think while it was a challenge, it also helped. So I would say that's probably the
mhm,
biggest challenge, was the speed of communication and the ability to communicate at scale, like we're able to now, right? We have Zoom, we have
mhm,
Slack, we have all these different collaboration tools, and to think of it as, if I could do it all over again, yeah, I would have started out with a bunch of Zoom meetings and breakouts, and then it would have maybe turned into a Slack channel with all the various people who were stakeholders in this, and being able to communicate with them at in lockstep, instead of these, let's say, I don't know, periodic flights out to these various sites that had a lot of, let's say, financial and time resource cost.
mhm. Yeah, so you took a challenge and you made it an advantage because you had the chance to take your time and really
Mhm.
process, and you weren't that pressed that uh, change needs to happen so fast as nowadays.
Yeah, actually, and I think, the other challenge there was that this was led sort of from the middle of the company. There wasn't somebody in the C-suite who was pushing this. So on one hand, the challenge was that this was coming from the middle, and then at the same time, that also made us much more accessible to the rank and file engineer. They were more open with us because they saw me and they're like, "Hey, here's this." Gosh, well, I must have been, 20, 20, 27 years old. Here I was, this very very green guy. Um, no, I think I was 30. Anyway,
Ah,
I'm dating I was still pretty green, still pretty green in my career. And so I think that made me much more
yeah.
approachable than, say, somebody who was
Hmm.
like a senior vice president or somebody in the
Yeah.
C suite. So
Yeah.
yeah, looking back on it, would I have changed a thing? I don't know. It's funny. You ask me these challenges, and then I'm thinking of them, and I'm also seeing how they were, to a certain extent, a benefit. But
Hmm.
it was really a great, because it wasn't on my MBO. It wasn't something that I was being evaluated on. I really did feel kind of a sense of freedom, because I
Hmm.
didn't have somebody kind of coming along behind me going, you should have done it this way. And that is another thing about being a trailblazer, is that there's not a lot of precedence for something like that, because somebody's not like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we did this
Yeah.
before and you're doing it wrong. So I think that was another benefit that I had, was
Yeah.
I was the resident expert, which was kind of funny given how junior I was.
Hmm. So, Stephen, if someone from the listeners would spot the same need for potential change and would have that fire in them, what would be your advice to them? And I know advice is a big word, but how would you walk them through, or what would you
Oh,
say to your younger self?
yeah, no, I like
Mm.
the question. I really love the question, because it ties in to something that I'm doing right now, which is I'm leading workshops on leadership. So it's called Work
Mhm.
of Leaders. It is a workshop built around everything DISC. And I would say, when it comes to creating a vision, so they're at that place, right? They see the need and they want that vision. There's three areas that they really need to look at. You call them drivers, if you will. First
Mhm.
one is be bold. So if it's not scaring you a little bit, then your vision really isn't big enough. So that's the first thing I would say. The
Mhm.
the second piece is start to test assumptions. And what I mean by testing assumptions is really looking at, as much as you want to go with a bold plan, you also need to kind of check in on feasibility. So test some of the
Mhm.
assumptions, understand, is this component of your vision, is it possible within your
Yeah.
organization? And that might take some conversations with people, but always start out with that bold vision and then scale back. And instead of the other way around, right? Where you've got a very, very small vision and then you start to say, oh, is this possible? But like, start really big. And so that was something I feel I did there, in that I really wanted, I remember the thinking at the time was every organization should have, I think the number was either between 3 to 5% black belts. And so I ran the numbers on the company and I said, this is how many black belts we need. Now, we didn't end up getting black belts. We got green belts. That's an okay compromise. But if I had started at green belt, who knows how many we would have had?
Yeah.
Who knows where it would have gone? So
Mhm.
boldness, checking assumptions, and then the last one was seeking counsel. And there's this word in Japanese. It's called nimawashi. So nimawashi, and it was coined, or it was made kind of more famous by Toyota Production System, so TPS.
Mhm.
So nimawashi means going around the roots, and so that's that seeking counsel. So instead of going, here's my bold vision, I've checked I've checked some of the assumptions. Now, instead of going to the big meeting and standing out on that precipice and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. Well, first go and talk to the decision makers one on one and ask them, hey,
Mhm.
what's your advice? What's your opinion on this? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Now, that doesn't mean that you take everything that they say and you go do it, but you really get their counsel and then fine tune what it is that you're going to do. So I think if you
Mhm.
take those three things, you're more likely to be very successful. You're more likely to get the big win than not doing that step. Those three things, right? So having that bold vision, checking some assumptions, and then seeking counsel from people who may have some very important opinions. And I'll say this, the added bonus, the pro tip about that is that when you do get to that big executive meeting and you've got your great idea, and as much as it sounds manipulative, you can name drop. You can say, when I spoke to insert vice president name, when I spoke to senior vice president, da 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 da, I modified my plan. And so it shows everybody in the room who you have on your side. And I
Yeah.
think that was really, for me, that was a game changer, because I did have these senior vice presidents behind me. And so while I didn't have to weaponize them by saying, using positional power and saying, oh, well, this is what so and so wants, the the resistor, the person in the organization who is not fully engaged in this change, they knew that I had built the relationships
Yeah.
And I think that was really, really helpful for me.
Yeah. I can see how helpful those 3 points are. And knowing that you have a class on that, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah.
First, for a bit, when you talked about the boldness, I was just thinking, why not start with the second step? But then I'm thinking that it's so important to really have that vision, have that dream and make it
Hmm.
big, because if we go directly to have assumptions, then we might not give ourselves permission to dream that big.
Yeah.
And I like how that comes first, and I'm totally on the counsel part. And I like what you said, to first approach them 101, which I think
Hmm.
it's safe and smart,
Yeah.
because you can learn if this is really a good idea or not. Also, it's a safe environment, it's respectful, and can really help people get on your side. If the second point, it's valid. So if
Hmm.
it's a valid solution,
Yeah.
wonderful.
And one on one, they're willing to tell you what they really think. That's the other thing. Is
Yes, yes,
there's no
yes,
holding back.
exactly. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's very safe. So thank you so much, Stephen. So
Yeah.
some things that I took out from what you shared is, first, if you see something, say something. Don't think that something that seems so big might be too big for you. Like, it doesn't matter what role you are have in the company, you can make a big change, and you can make a change that I'm sure that the company even now remembers that someone,
Right.
Stephen, had started that change. And I think it's an example for all the other changes that have happened in that company.
Yeah.
So,
No,
Stephen,
thank you.
if anyone from the listeners would like to connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah. I hang out on LinkedIn. From a social media perspective, that's where I hang out and that's where I live. They can find me easily by typing in Stephen English, comma, PCC. And that's just a way to distinguish myself from the other Stephen Englishes out there.
Stephen,
And they could also find me on my website, www.stephenenglish.net.
thank you so much, Stephen. It
Yeah,
was a
great.
pleasure to have this
Yeah,
conversation with you.
likewise.
Bye.